The sky above Kareth had forgotten how to be blue. Ash drifted like tired snow, painting sunset in rust and midnight in iron. The towers leaned with every quake. Engines screamed under too much strain, and the people walked with their eyes fixed on the ground, as if even the sky had betrayed them. Lylaa stood in the temple courtyard, wrists sore from the cuffs that had just been removed. Around her, citizens filled balconies, their whispers crawling over her like frost. Too tall, too loud, too much. Words that had haunted her since childhood now echoed as judgment. The High Counselor raised the shard of verdict glass, its surface glowing faintly as though it remembered every verdict ever spoken. His voice rode the ancient acoustics of the temple. Lylaa of House Vec, you are charged with disrupting ration order, harboring outsiders, and transmitting signals beyond our skies without sanction. In this age of collapse, your defiance is poison. Lylaa's jaw set. I sent messages because no one else would. Our wells are fouled. Children collapse in the bread lines. You hide behind silence, as if obedience will hold the ground together. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. A soldier shifted, armor clicking nervously. The counselor's voice carried on, tired but sharp. You will not bend. Therefore, you are cast out. The words struck heavier than chains. No guard seized her, no hand shoved her. That was the cruelty of it. Exile without touch, abandonment disguised as ritual. Lylaa turned. She walked from the courtyard with deliberate calm, refusing to let them see haste. Through the city, she moved like a shadow, no longer welcome. Market stalls sagged empty. A mural of the first astronauts was scraped into ghosts. Sirens coughed weak warnings to no one who believed empty the spaceport. Floodlights turned everything harsh and interrogated. Evacuation craft rose in sleek arcs toward the stars, names written neatly on manifests that would never bear hers. Her ship waited far from those white lanes, an old courier cutter, patched and scarred, yet stubborn in its survival. She pressed her palm to the hatch. Its side open as though it remembered her. Inside, the cabin smelled of oil and worn metal. The console flickered awake in tired orange light, scattering warnings across the screen. Fuel thin, thrusters unstable, life support limited. Lylaa slipped into the pilot's chair. Her breath steadied. She rested one hand on the cracked throttle, the other on the console's edge. "Hello, Pilgrim," she whispered. Naming the ship filled the cabin with something less than loneliness. The cutter's engines trembled as Lylaa powered them up. The sound filled the cabin like a beast coughing itself awake. Warning lights glowed across the console, but she ignored them for now. She set her palms on the controls, steady and sure. "Poor control," she said into the cracked mic. "Courier cutter requesting emergency ascent. Vector 27 north." Static stretched. Then a voice answered, thin, worn down by too many hours on duty. "Courier, you're not on any manifest." "No one wants me on their lists," Lylaa replied. "Open me a sky." Another pause. Then, softer, "Launch corridor 12 is clear." "Make it quick." The thrusters shuddered, coughed, and finally caught. The ship lurched upward, dragging itself free of gravity's grip. Below, the spaceport shrank into a scatter of lights. Dust clouds swirled as the ground quaked again, swallowing towers into heaps of ash. Lylaa kept her eyes forward. The cutter wobbled, steadied, then rose more smoothly. The city shrank into lines and scars. Salt flats spread across the land like pale wounds. Ash thickened around her, a ceiling of smoke and storm. Then the ship tore through, and blackness opened above. Stars, cold and endless, burned in their quiet watch. Kareth's sun glared like a small, stubborn coin, refusing to dim completely. Liara's breath released in a shaky sigh. She kept one hand on the throttle, the other tracing the faint curve of her home below. "I'm not leaving because I don't love you," she whispered. "I'm leaving because love needs a road." Her gaze fell to the drawer beneath the navigation panel. She opened it carefully. Inside lay two keepsakes, a strip of red cloth from her father's turbine badge and a small spool of copper wire. Relics of hands that built rather than destroyed. She pressed the ribbon into her sleeve until its warmth sank into her skin. The comms panel blinked with a waiting folder, outbound transmissions. Dozens of files she had sent into the void. Pleas for aid. Coordinates of refugee shelters. Offers of salvage, skills, labor. Most had gone unanswered. Some replies had been insults, tariffs, or empty threats. One had corrected her grammar. Another, more sinister, had offered protection in exchange for betrayal. She deleted that one twice. Liara leaned toward the mic. Her voice steadied, carried by the hum of the ship. To any ship, any station, any flag. This is Liara of Kareth. Our wells are poisoned, our children starving, our council silent. I can pay in labor, in knowledge, in promise. Even a refusal is an answer. Thank you. She sent it. Then again on a different band. The antenna hummed its lonely song. Silence pressed back like a wall. Exile, she thought, is a change of address, not a change of self. Liara paced the narrow corridors of the cutter, checking seals, listening to the faint groan of pipes. In the galley, she measured a mouthful of water, swallowed it like a ceremony more than a meal. Her supplies were pitiful. 2 crates of scrap ceramics, a spool of fiber mesh, a toolkit missing half the proper wrenches. Yet she cataloged them carefully. Order, she had learned, could be a rebellion if it kept her from breaking in the way her enemies expected. Back in the cockpit, she braided her hair to steady her hands. The silence was deep, pressing in on every side. Exile was not just distance. It was the absence of every familiar sound. She reminded herself that silence could also mean freedom. The speaker hissed. At first she thought it was ordinary static. Then a thread of sound curled within it, too deliberate to be random. Liara froze, breath sharp in her chest. Man vessel coordinates. Her pulse surged. Human. Not the clipped speech of Dominion patrols. Not the mercantile tone of syndicates. Human. She gripped the mic repeat. This is Liara of Kareth Exile Cutter, unarmed, requesting confirmation. The signal broke, then returned, steady, patient, like a beacon pulse. On the auxiliary screen, numbers scrolled across in fragments, damaged but recognizable. Coordinates. Liara worked quickly, cleaning the data, running it through the ship's old math. A course resolved itself, faint but clear. Somewhere out there, far from the patrol lanes and empires, a human signal had chosen not to look away. A smile tugged at her lips, cracked and uncertain, the first in weeks. She tapped the console. Let's reach them, Pilgrim. The cutter groaned as the thrusters adjusted. Stars tilted. The planet below shrank into a wounded marble, its storms curling across its face like scars. Liara let herself look at it one last time. I did not bend, she whispered to the world that had condemned her. I reached, because that was the truth. She had never been too much, never too loud. She had only been unwilling to stay silent when silence meant death. The beacon pulse kept rhythm with her heartbeat. Each flash on the screen pulled her forward into the dark. The cutter slid along its new path, old metal creaking, engines humming with stubborn faith. For the first time since exile began, the future did not feel like a sentence. It felt like a door, and Liara, cast out and unbroken, reached for the handle. Liara locked the beacon's coordinates into the NAV system. The cutter shuddered as it adjusted course, old metal creaking with every correction. She didn't know what waited at the other end. Pirates, raiders, or nothing but a broken relay. But she followed anyway. Hours bled into one another. The stars crawled past. Once she had loved the sight of them, each point of light a promise of distant life. Now, they felt like cold witnesses too far away to care. She dozed in the pilot's chair, jerking awake each time the hull groaned louder than usual. Then, a flare, not in her eyes, but on the scanner. A ship, small, human-built, orbiting a barren moon. No patrol markings, no corporate registry, just a battered freighter with hull scars deep enough to tell stories. Her throat tightened. She opened comms, static rushing in. "Unknown vessel," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "This is Liara of Kareth. I received your signal. Do you copy?" For a moment, only silence. Then a voice, roughened by static and weariness, but unmistakably human. "Copy. You actually came." Liara blinked, startled by the words. "You expected me?" A low laugh crackled through. Didn't know if anyone would answer. Been throwing that beacon into the void for weeks. She leaned closer to the mic. "You're alone?" "Not by choice. Crew's gone. Pirates. I got the ship moving again, but not far. Supplies thin. I thought I'd die here." A pause. Then softer, "But you came." Something in the way he said it unsettled her. Not accusation, not desperation, something closer to awe. "I was cast out," she admitted. "Exile. My people call me too much to be loved. So I left." Static hummed. Then maybe you're exactly the kind of person worth meeting." Her pulse kicked hard. She almost laughed. Harsh, bitter. "Others would call you a fool. I am alien, tall, strange. Not safe." The voice answered without hesitation. "Everyone's strange when you're dying alone." Liara sat back, staring at the battered freighter drifting in the dark. Against all reason, she angled the cutter closer. The freighter loomed larger in her viewport as Liara eased the cutter closer. Its hull bore the scars of old battles, plasma burns, jagged repairs welded in haste. Yet it still lived, clinging stubbornly to orbit like a beast too proud to die. "Docking collar looks half broken," she muttered to herself. "But I've trusted worse." Static brushed her ears again, then the voice returned. "You're approaching fast. Careful. My stabilizers are shot." "I see them," she replied. Her hands moved across the controls with calm precision. The cutter trembled as the docking clamps aligned, metal screeching against metal before settling with a thud. For a moment, silence. Then the hiss of atmosphere equalizing. Liara paused at the hatch, helmet under one arm. Every instinct warned her that stepping aboard a stranger's ship, human or not, was reckless. But exile had already stolen her caution. She pressed the seal. The hatch opened with a groan. Warm, stale air greeted her. The corridor beyond was narrow, lit by flickering strips of light. She stepped inside, boots heavy on the deck. At the far end stood the human. Tall by his people's standards, though still shorter than Liara. His hair was dark, unkempt. A stubble shadowed his jaw. His clothes were patched and threadbare, but his stance was steady, his gaze unwavering. He didn't flinch, didn't draw a weapon. He simply looked at her, as if measuring truth in her shape. "You're real," he said quietly. Liara tilted her head. "You expected a ghost?" After weeks of silence, maybe. Or worse, a syndicate raider answering with knives. He gave a tired shrug. "But not you." Her chest tightened. "Do I not look dangerous to you? You look tired." The answer stunned her more than any blade. No one had ever looked at her and seen weariness instead of threat. She straightened, unsure whether to feel insulted or relieved. "My name is Liara, exile of Kareth. The human nodded once. Marcus, survivor of nowhere important. They stood in the corridor, two strangers bound by emptiness, the silence between them heavier than steel. Finally, Marcus stepped aside. "Come in," he said, "if you're willing to share what little warmth is left." Lylaa hesitated, then moved forward. Her boots echoed softly, and for the first time in many years, she realized no one was calling her too much. The galley of Marcus's freighter was little more than a box with a table bolted to the floor. One wall hummed faintly with the effort of keeping the reactor stable. The air smelled of metal and stale bread. Yet for Lylaa, it was warmer than the grandest hall on Kareth. Marcus poured 2 cups of recycled water. He slid one toward her without comment. Lylaa stared at it, the simple gesture somehow heavier than all the verdicts of her counsel. She lifted the cup, tasted the faint bitterness, and set it down with deliberate care. "You didn't run," she said at last. "Run?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "When you saw me, others always do. Too tall, too loud, too strange. But you stood there." He leaned back, arms crossed loosely. "Running takes energy I don't have. Besides, I've seen monsters. Real ones. You're not one." Her breath caught. The words pressed against old scars. She wanted to argue, to tell him how often her own people had called her that very thing. Instead, she said, "What if you're wrong?" Marcus's eyes softened. "Then I'd rather be wrong beside company than right alone." Silence stretched. Not hostile, not awkward, simply full. Lylaa found herself studying his hands, rough with work, scarred in small ways that spoke of years of surviving. They were not the hands of someone who judged lightly. He broke the quiet first. "So, you got a ship. I got, well, not much. But maybe between us, there's enough to last longer than either alone." Lylaa tilted her head. "A partnership? A necessity," he corrected. Then, after a beat, "and maybe more than that if trust decides it." The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Trust takes time. Good thing the stars aren't going anywhere." For the first time since exile began, Lylaa felt something stir that wasn't anger or grief. It was fragile like fire coaxed from damp wood. She glanced toward the viewport, where the moon's horizon glowed faintly. "You may regret this," she warned. Marcus smirked faintly. "You wouldn't be the first mistake I made, but maybe the first worth keeping." The words lingered between them, fragile yet solid, like a bridge spanning 2 ruined worlds. The freighter's lights flickered again, longer this time, shadows crawling across the galley walls. Lylaa frowned. "Your reactor sounds unstable." Marcus exhaled through his teeth. "Been nursing it for weeks. It keeps the air cycling and the heat barely on. But it won't hold forever." As if hearing him, the deck trembled. A low thud rattled through the ship, followed by an angry whine from somewhere deep within the hull. The lights guttered, then died, plunging them into sudden dark. Only the faint glow of emergency strips painted their faces. Marcus rose at once, grabbing a handheld lamp from the wall. "Main conduit's blown. If I don't patch it, we lose life support." "I'll help," Lylaa said, already moving to follow. He hesitated. "You don't even know the layout." "I know broken systems," she cut in. "Show me." Together, they pushed into the narrow maintenance corridor. The air grew hotter with each step, tinged with acrid smoke. Sparks spat from exposed wires overhead. The emergency lamp cast wild shadows on the bulkheads, throwing both their faces into sharp relief. At the junction, a panel hung half loose. Marcus knelt, tools spread in a clatter. Coolant lines ruptured, pressures dropping fast. Lylaa crouched beside him, her larger frame filling the corridor. "Hold the lamp steady." She reached into the panel, ignoring the hiss of steam against her skin. Fingers too strong for delicate work moved with surprising care. pressing the copper wire she had kept from her father's spool into place. Marcus blinked. You carry repair wire in your sleeve? It reminds me that even broken things can bind together, she said simply. For a moment, silence except for their breathing and the sizzle of hot metal. Then the reactor's whine softened. The deck's tremor eased. Lights overhead flickered back to life, faint but steady. Marcus let out a sharp breath, half relief, half amazement. You just saved my ship. Lylaa withdrew her scorched hands, flexing her fingers. No, we saved it. Their eyes met in the narrow glow. In that instant, Lylaa felt something shift. No council verdict, no exile brand, no whispered insult could survive here, in this corridor where survival was shared. When the lights stabilized, Marcus slumped back against the bulkhead, sweat beading on his brow. Thought that was it, he admitted. One more failure, and the ship would have frozen us out. Lylaa sat opposite him in the narrow corridor. The scorched marks on her hands glowed faintly under the emergency lamp. Failure isn't the same as ending, she said. It's just another bend in the road. He studied her, as if trying to understand how someone exiled and branded could still speak with such certainty. Finally, he shook his head with a tired smile. You talk like someone who's lost everything. I have, Lylaa replied. But that means I know what remains is worth fighting for. The silence that followed was not heavy this time. It was warm, fragile, almost comforting. Marcus passed her a ration bar, its wrapper torn but contents intact. She accepted it, chewing slowly, the taste of recycled grain far richer than any banquet she had ever attended. A faint tremor rippled through the hull, not reactor-borne this time. Lylaa stiffened. That was external. Marcus pushed himself up, heading for the cockpit. She followed close, instinct sharp. Through the viewport, the void was quiet except for the pale moon glow. But the scanner told another story, faint blips circling at the edge of range. Hunters, Marcus muttered, jaw tightening. Pirates, maybe, or worse. Lylaa's pulse steadied instead of racing. She leaned over the console, eyes narrowing at the patterns. They haven't locked weapons yet. They're watching. Marcus shot her a look, and waiting to see if we're prey. Lylaa folded her arms, the copper wire still smudging her sleeve. Then we'll show them wrong. The blips lingered, patient as wolves. In that cockpit, with Marcus's gaze steady beside hers, Lylaa realized something new had sparked. Not just survival, but alliance. A fragile fire shared between two exiles in the dark, daring the night to swallow them. The scanner blips lingered at the edge of range, circling like wolves around a campfire. Lylaa leaned closer to the console, eyes narrowing. They're waiting for us to stumble. One weakness, and they'll strike. Marcus adjusted the power grid, keeping the lights dim. We don't have the guns to scare them off. Only chance is to look like we're not worth the chase. Lylaa shook her head. Predators don't leave prey because it's weak. They leave when it burns back. She rose, moving to the supply crate. From inside, she pulled the copper mesh and ceramic shards she had cataloged earlier. Marcus stared. What are you doing? Making the ship look bigger, she said. With swift, deliberate motions, she strung the wire and fragments across the hull, plating outside the viewport. Each shard reflected faint light into the void, scattering false signatures. The cutter suddenly looked less like a dying freighter and more like a vessel with teeth. The blips hesitated. A beat of silence. Then one drifted closer, testing. Lylaa's jaw set. Marcus, warm the engines. Show them we can run if we want to. The freighter's thrusters hummed, not strong but steady. On the scanner, the hunters shifted. Two peeled away. The last lingered, then vanished into the dark. Lylaa released a breath she hadn't realized she held. Marcus leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief. You just bluffed 3 ships with scrap metal and attitude. She allowed herself a faint smile. Exile teaches invention. The cockpit grew quiet again, stars stretching endless and cold. Marcus looked at her, not as a monster, not as a stranger, but as someone who had saved his life. Guess I was right, he said softly. You're not what they think you are. Her throat tightened. And what do you think I am? His answer came without pause. Exactly the ally I needed. For Lylaa, the words burned brighter than any beacon. In the dark, among drifting hunters and failing systems, she felt something impossible spark alive, belonging. The storm came without warning, not on a planet's surface, but here, in the silence of orbit. A field of ionized particles swept across the moon, turning sensors to static and painting the viewport with false lightning. The freighter shook as if gripped by invisible fists. Lylaa braced herself against the console. This interference will blind us. The hunters could slip right through. Marcus cursed under his breath, working the stabilizers. I can't see them. Not on radar, not on scopes. But Lylaa didn't need scanners to feel danger. Every hair on her arms lifted, instincts sharpened by years of exile. They weren't gone. They were circling, waiting for the cover of the storm. A shudder ran through the hull. A dull thud echoed from the aft section. Marcus's eyes widened. They've latched on. Boarding clamps. Lylaa was already moving. She grabbed the wrench from the tool rack, its weight solid in her hand. They'll expect fear. We'll give them fire. The corridor lights flickered, painting their faces in pale flashes. The ship groaned as the first boarding tube pierced the airlock. Steam hissed, metal screamed. The hatch began to buckle. Marcus raised his old rifle, its barrel scarred and patched. Not sure even fire straight anymore. Then aim for the loudest one, Lylaa said grimly. The hatch blew inward with a roar of pressure release. Figures spilled through, raiders clad in scavenged armor, faces hidden by crude masks. They shouted in a dozen tongues, weapons raised. Lylaa didn't wait. She surged forward, striking with a wrench. Metal cracked against armor, sparks bursting. A raider staggered back, stunned by the sheer force. Marcus fired. The rifle barked, wild but true enough to drop another intruder. The corridor filled with smoke, shouts, the clash of desperate survival. For a moment, it was chaos. But within the chaos, something strange. Lylaa and Marcus moved together. His shots pushed enemies toward her reach. Her blows cleared space for his fire. It was not polished, not trained, but it was rhythm, born in the heartbeat of shared defiance. The raiders faltered. One shouted orders, retreating toward the hatch. Another dragged their wounded away. Within moments, the boarding party fled back through the breach, sealing the tube with a hiss. Silence crashed down, broken only by their heavy breathing. Marcus lowered the rifle, chest heaving. We actually drove them off. Lylaa gripped the wrench, knuckles white, breath ragged. Not by strength, she said, by refusing to break. The storm outside raged on, but within the freighter, something stronger than fear had taken root. For the first time, Lylaa realized she was not merely surviving beside Marcus. They were fighting as one. The storm eased, leaving silence heavy as stone. The freighter drifted in the dock, its hull scarred but whole. Marcus slumped into the pilot's chair, rifle across his knees. Lylaa leaned against the bulkhead, the wrench still in her hand. They'll be back, Marcus said quietly. Hunters don't give up easy. Lylaa's jaw tightened. Then we'll make them regret returning. But even as she spoke, her thoughts pulled inward. She had stood in this same posture before, weapon in hand, people watching her with fear instead of trust. Back then, she had been the exile, the too much, the monster. Yet here, Marcus had not run. He had fought beside her as if her presence was strength, not threat. Her throat ached with the weight of words unspoken. On Kerith, they called me dangerous, unfit, too loud, too large, too much. They cast me out because they believed I could never be loved. Marcus looked at her, gaze steady, unflinching. They were wrong. She laughed once, sharp and bitter. Were they? Look at me, taller than most, scarred, strange. A monster to the eyes of those who never listened. He rose slowly, crossing the narrow space until he stood before her. I saw you fight. I saw you fix what was broken with your own hands. I saw you risk yourself for someone you'd only just met. If that's a monster, then I'll take monsters over men any day. Her breath hitched. You don't mean that. He didn't look away. I do. You are not a monster, Lylaa. You're the reason I'm alive. And if the hunters return tomorrow, I choose to face them with you, not despite who you are, but because of it. The wrench slipped from her fingers, clattering softly to the floor. For the first time since exile began, her chest loosened. The verdict glass of a council shattered in memory, replaced by these simple words spoken without ceremony. A faint tremor passed through the ship. More storm, or perhaps the hunters regrouping. But it didn't matter. Not now. Lylaa met Marcus's gaze. In his eyes, she saw no fear, no judgment. Only recognition. Only choice. Slowly, she nodded. Then we stand together. Marcus smiled, weary but real. Together. Outside, the storm thinned, revealing stars sharp and endless. The beacon pulse still glowed faint on the console, but Lylaa no longer needed it. She had found what she was searching for. Not rescue, not escape, but a place where she was no longer too much. Where she was exactly enough.